So yeah, I'm James. I'm head of UX design at Yoti, where we're building apps to help people take back control over their data and prove who they are. So once you've identified the problem worth solving, how do you go about turning this into a person-first onboarding experience? And what I mean by that specifically is that although the more or less users you acquire will ultimately break or make a successful product, without them it cannot work. So the user need and benefit should always be forefront of mind when we start this journey. So I'd like to start with a little experiment. Would everyone please close their eyes? Don't worry, I'm not going to run out of the room and just leave you.
Don't take my wallet.
So I'm going to describe something to you. I'd like you to think about it as I describe it, and try and imagine what it is I'm describing. I'll repeat it a couple of times. A regular quadrilateral that can also be defined as a rectangle in which two adjacent sides have equal length. So I'll say this one more time. A regular quadrilateral that can also be defined as a rectangle in which two adjacent sides have equal length. Okay, so you can open your eyes. Anybody want to sort of have a go at what I was describing? Shout it out if you know.
Square.
Yep. Excellent. So the lesson learned here, so is ultimately like what we shouldn't do is unduly load the user with unnecessary information. It takes far less effort to process that a square is a square when we see it, as opposed to having it described to us. This is cognitive load, and one of the first topics that I'm going to discuss today. As mentioned in the first slide, I'll also be talking about consent and onboarding. So what is cognitive load? Well, there are many ways to describe it, but ultimately it's too much choice, too much thought required, and too little clarity. So we already have so much choice available to us when it comes to products. Lots of competing products, messages, value propositions, and identifying the problem we're solving is just the first part on the road to launching a successful product. Now, this stat I think is pretty amazing. So the average app loses 71% of its users just one day after a download. So when it comes to choice, we've got to get it right in terms of the message that we're giving to users. Otherwise, there's a likelihood that they're going to drop off. And then when it comes to how much thought is required, did you know the average amount of remotely conscious decisions an adult makes each day equals to about 35,000? So adding to this during onboarding is only going to add to the user's cognitive load. And then when it comes to clarity, there's a fine balance. And the temptation will be that you'll want to tell users everything up front. You want to tell them absolutely everything about your product, wow them with like amazing graphics, possibly kind of, just want to sort of like keep them going until they're hooked. At the same time, you might want to kind of keep it super minimal in order to kind of get them through this process so they're kind of onto the home screen and creating an account as soon as possible. But both of these come with a caution. Try to avoid excess colours and imagery and layouts that don't add any value. At the same time, when it comes to simplicity, don't simplify it so much that things become unclear and misunderstood. So as I mentioned at the start, I work for Yoti, and the way that we have tackled cognitive load in our onboarding process is through rounds and rounds of user testing, and ultimately through person-first design. So one of the only things we ask users to do as part of the onboarding process is take a photo of themselves. By being yourself and showing that you're human, you are no longer represented by a username or a password or a number, or even have to think about how you want to be represented. You're not presented with you know, we suggest your username could be this, or you know, you should try a 1 or a, sorry, I got distracted by the question, a 1 or a comma or something in your password. So you simply are, you are you. So I've got a few takeaways in particular around cognitive load. So making people think or having to remember requires the most of the mental resources. So as I sort of mentioned, presenting someone with a long form, memorable word options, or asking for alpha forgettable passwords as part of a sign-up process is the most unhuman way to design, in my opinion. And the second one is to communicate your value proposition to your users in one sentence. Now this is generally, you know, quite a hard challenge for people, but you know, if you set out that transparent context up front to build trust, this will reduce cognitive load. And lastly, to reduce cognitive load, keep it short, simple, and human-centered. And make sure you tell them what they need to know at the right time. If we can make it human and not administrative, you know, this is a step. Sorry, this is a step towards the most human and user-centered form in terms of cognitive load. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is consent, and this will be discussed, you know, many times over the few days that we're here, I'm sure. But in particular, when it comes to onboarding, it's permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. Ultimately, what do you need from me and why? So I really love this quote from Samuel Hillock of useronboarding.com. And he says, whenever asking for information from a user, I filter every decision through the lens of can this credibly be represented as being to the user's benefit in providing this. And I think this is really important when it comes to consent, because ultimately what is it that I'm signing up for? And how do I know that the information that I'm providing is going to be beneficial to you, and what am I going to get out of this? So when it comes to terms and conditions, patterns, terms of service, these are probably some that you've probably seen and are quite familiar with when you're signing up to services. And essentially they're kind of like anti-patterns when it comes to consent, because these companies are just assuming that upon registration you're agreeing to the terms of service. They're pretty much kind of hidden, they're in tiny fonts, and they don't encourage users to actually kind of go and have a look at them and try to understand what they're signing up to. And that's typically because, you know, the way that terms and conditions are written, they're kind of lawyer focused, lawyer written, and it's just assumed that people won't understand them, so they just get hidden. So again, at Yoti, one thing we've tried to do, and this is with the help of our guardians, I don't know if any of you sort of watched Doc Searles just now, but he's one of our guardians, and we kind of go to them for advice, in particular things around terms and conditions. Now, we're not able to just completely remove them, but one thing that we were advised to do by them is to try and give users a bit of a summary of our terms, so they have something tangible that they can actually kind of understand. And again, through multiple rounds of user testing, as I said, this is really important that we get it in front of people and get them to understand, you know, does this have value to the process? But we have this idea of a promise. Again, that was kind of mentioned a couple of times, and I think, you know, how much you want to hang on that is kind of up to you. But the feedback we've had so far is that people really, really appreciate having this summary up front of effectively what they're signing up to. And the other thing we've tried to do is be fully transparent. And so we've added a link around, you know, how we handle your data. And this equally, although the information that we sort of point them to is further down in the terms and conditions, it's up front and it's at the point that they're kind of entering into well, I guess a contract with us. Another good practice is to kind of give people a receipt of these transactions. And Apple kind of go one way to doing this by giving you the option to sort of send the terms to yourself. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect, but it's just, you know, it's a step in the right direction. So But why stop at terms and conditions? When it comes to receipts and proof of consent. So remember, this is about permission for something to happen. And one of our core features at Yoti is a receipt book. So every transaction you enter into, you get a receipt for it, and you have a copy of with whom and with what information you shared. So receipts, in our view, are kind of a step forward to having full control over personal information. So in terms of some takeaways around consent, so always provide a clear reason why you're asking for consent and how it will benefit the user in their ongoing journey. Always ask for permission and provide users with a copy of the transaction between you and them. And transparency is key when asking for consent. Try to remove ambiguity, be honest and upfront, especially if you've got nothing to hide. So, onboarding. So ultimately this is the process of setting up first-time users to be successful with your product. Now how you define success is up to you, like whether that's getting them to the home screen or whether that's getting them to take the first or the second action or beyond that. It's up to you how you want to define it. But so success can be defined in many different ways. But when it comes to success, again, you've probably seen a pattern here in terms of quotes. But I particularly like this one from James Clear, who writes about behavioural psychology, habit formation, and performance improvement. And it says, every time you make a decision, it's like doing another rep in the gym. And similar to how your muscles get tired at the end of a workout, the strength of your willpower fades as you make more decisions. So again, when it comes to onboarding, imagine you've got 20 odd screens to go through. Your willpower will diminish over time. So it's not all about you, it's about how, what are you providing for the user at the point of onboarding and how effectively are they going to then, make a success of that journey with your product. So here's an example of a couple of sign-up forms. The one on the left, it's not a value proposition, but ultimately it sort of says at the top very clearly what I'm signing up for. And they might not be the best. It might not be the best coffee in London, but at the point it's kind of giving me a reason why I should sign up for it. The other interesting thing about this is that they only ask me for my first name, and they only ask for an email. And a password, obviously, because that's the norm at the moment. But there was a limited amount of information in order for me to kind of get started. Now, the one thing they don't do is they don't tell me at this point what they're doing with that information, so they've kind of failed there. But it's still a low barrier to entry when it comes to onboarding. And then the one on the right, which is another coffee app, they're asking for a whole ton of information, but they don't tell me why or where this information's going. So you can kind of see when it comes to, if we go back to sort of cognitive load and onboarding, this in particular, there's a challenge here. So Facebook, they ask for a lot of information when you sign up with them. I don't know how many people sign up to Facebook, or if you did, it was probably a long time ago. But these are just 3 of 8 screens that they ask you to kind of complete as you're onboarding. Now, one thing they do quite well is they do actually kind of give you a reason why you should add certain things. So in terms of what's your name, it states that it makes it easier for friends to recognise you. So at least they're giving a bit of context. But at the same time, what they're not doing here is giving any indication to the user how many steps they're going to need to complete to actually even get to a point that they feel that they've kind of started something. So again, cognitively, you could be sort of halfway through this and think, how much more information am I going to have to give away before I actually kind of feel like I've started? So, equally, permissions are a very important part of onboarding, and if you don't get this right and you don't explain to users why specifically you need permission for something, there's a good chance that they won't allow it. They're perceived right now as kind of like a marketing tool. So most people kind of tend to deny these until they actually sort of see any value in it. But if you can explain the value in the context, they're more likely to accept, and then that will help you kind of increase engagement as you kind of further onboard users. So a few takeaways around onboarding. it doesn't necessarily end once users create an account, reach the home screen, or even take their first action. So onboarding also isn't specifically just around the kind of sign-up screens, in a product. Like this could start at the point that people start talking about your brand. So way before and even after. It's a continuous journey of successful actions that puts the person first in order for them to succeed. So it's not just about, like I say, it's not just about that initial screens. It's like how do you encourage them to kind of succeed every step of the journey they go on. And then really important, so show them the value of your product through them using it. Don't default to just telling them how to use it. And again, this is really important. Like just telling them what it does is not really going to help them. You need to sort of go back to this, like, what is the problem that you're helping them solve? So I have a small task as well, and this is something that you can try and do now if you want. Some of them are probably a little bit more challenging than others, or it's something that you can kind of take with you and kind of think about it. I've got copies of all the takeaways, very old-fashioned, printed out. I'll also sort of share the slides as well, but they should sort of help you, in terms of kind of defining some of these problems. But one in particular, define your value proposition or problem worth solving in one sentence. This could be for the company you work for. It could be for your own company. Like, what is the sort of value proposition? And the idea of doing it in one sentence is all about, how can you sort of say that to somebody, in a way that's sort of human and friendly, and it's not, and the second point around consent. So define how and at what point you'll collect consent, and give users not only proof of this, but a way to retract it at any point as well. So I mentioned it's all about kind of giving permission, and it's sort of like an agreement between two people. Now, some might argue that just offering consent is like, it is a one-way thing, and once you've kind of agreed to it, then, that's one step in the right direction. But, why shouldn't you be able to kind of cancel that contract as well? And like, at what point do you kind of notify the user that has been cancelled? Is it in the form of like when you delete the app? How do you actually sort of tell them that, you no longer hold any of their information? And the last one, determine what key piece of information you need to get a user started. So this could be anything, like I sort of showed, like from a name, or is it, as we're trying to do, it's just your face. But yeah, ultimately, like, what bit of information do you need in order for them to sort of succeed in that journey of onboarding? So, and I'll just leave you with this, which hopefully kind of sums up some of the things that I've talked about, and the conference itself. So, thank you.